Hi, my name's Itali and in this video I'll be drawing a commission for Zemper. As usual, this is a time-lapse video and does contain fast-moving and flashing images. So Zemper asked me to draw their character flying in the upper layers of the clouds above a faraway land scene below. I had a pretty strong picture in my mind and I was actually really excited to paint some clouds as it is something I want to practice more, and I feel like I'm on the edge of being able to draw clouds really well, so I was pretty excited to draw this picture and went about doing my first sketch so I could show Zemper the idea that I had. Now, my art teacher always told me that you're not allowed to use, or you shouldn't use, your first idea, and that you should always sketch out some additional ideas and pick the best one from among them, and that rarely the first one is your best idea. So after I'd done the first sketch, I then went about to try and think of other ideas that I could show Zemper, just to make sure that the first idea I had, just in case it wasn't the best idea, if they wanted to choose a different one, there were other options available to them. Now, despite what my high school art teacher did tell me, I very often end up going with my first idea, and quite often my clients choose the first idea as well. I think everybody is a bit different, and from my point of view, my first idea that I draw is usually the one that is strongest in my mind, and I guess it just comes out a lot clearer, so quite often people will choose it, but not always. I have had people choose things that I personally wouldn't have chosen, but I drew them anyway so that they had options. So it's a good idea to draw more than one, just in case your client or the person asking you to draw for you has different ideas on what they like to what you like to draw. It is a good idea to give them a different option in that scenario. But Zemper and I tend to be on the same page a lot of the time, at least when it comes with the base sketching. So we did choose the first idea, and now I go about refining the sketch a bit more. I did quite enjoy this process. I do feel like I've gotten a lot better at more realistic poses and forms lately. So this part was a lot of fun to me, and I have been trying very hard at making sure that the volumes are correct and perspectives are better. So now that I'm more confident in drawing dragons overall, I find it easier to explore better perspectives. And I did have a bit of help from my husband. He sort of told me how to have like 2-point perspective. So I was trying to draw this originally with one, like I had the idea in my head, but I just couldn't get it to work properly with like one vanishing line. And he sort of told me how to have 2. And I sort of just like built the blocks from there. But I quite liked how this is looking at the moment. I do struggle a bit with the back legs and the further away wing, which you'll see later on in the video. But at this stage, I was quite pleased with how the sketching process was going. As you can see, I still use hands as references for wings, and I was struggling a tiny bit with this, so I did sketch out an actual hand to use as a reference for the wing bones, and it did help a lot. You'll now see my small struggle with the 1-point perspective, and I actually used a perspective tool in Artflow to try to get it right, but you'll see I have 1 point, and then later on I'll be dragging it out to 2 points, way below the image, because you actually wouldn't be able to see the vanishing spot from this angle. Now, I did spend around an hour on the original drafting sketching, but that did include a lot of groundwork for the background, which I used later on and saved me time in coloring the background itself. So it was, in my mind, quite like time well used. I spend a lot of time doing the refined sketch, but I have found lately that because my refined sketches are much better than what they used to be, it does save me time later on when I turn to rendering and shading the dragon, as I'm spending less time fixing awful mistakes. The sketch is a lot solider than it used to be, and I don't need to paint over bits over and over again because I kind of got them right the first time. So the refined sketch might take me longer, but the detailing and the rendering takes me less time. So I guess overall it kind of just works out about the same amount of time I'm spending on things. But it's more pleasant time, I guess. So this did take me 12.5 hours to do in total. And it sounds a lot. It is a lot. It was a little bit of a struggle to get through it all. But I'm really happy with how this turned out in the end. And I did spend quite a long time doing the scales. And I was worried that the scales themselves were going to blow the time out on this picture, but we did estimate 12 hours to begin with based on another scale picture I had done, so I was quite happy to be very close to that original estimate. I'm getting much better at estimating time, so I was pleased that it took me that amount of time. I'm slowly starting to learn how long things actually take me to draw. Now I just have to fix the positioning of that far off wing, and I've cut out most of the fiddling around with it because I spent a lot of time trying to fix it and it not looking great. But in the end, what I did is I went into a 3D art program called ZBrush, and I pulled out an old model I'd made and I positioned it roughly into the position of the drawing I'd done. I took a photo, loaded it in Artflow, and then traced over it, so that I had the perspective right and the positioning right for the wing, because I just couldn't get it right. I couldn't find reference pictures of this precise pose either, which I guess is a good thing. It means it's quite an original posed drawing, but it just meant it was difficult for me to figure out how to do that far off wing. But yay, 3D sculpting for the win. Woo! So now we're moving into the long, slow process of rendering. So I've just got some darker and lighter shades here, and I'm basically just doing what I normally do, which is just paint it out for hours and hours on end, slowly building up the shapes and changing the shapes. I put these scales on in dark blue and then realized that I was just going to make a mess of them as I painted the lighter blue, so I actually end up pretty much removing them for most of the process and then adding them back in again later when it was easier to do. So now I'm just making the shapes in grey, shading it, making sure it looks good, and then once I'm happy with how the forms all look, then I go back in and I add the scales back on. And I think I spent 4 hours adding the scales alone. But I painted nearly every single one of them, so I need to find a faster, more effective way to paint individual scales. I'm sure there is one, I just don't want it to look generated. So I know you can get brushes and stuff that look like scales, but they do look just generated to me, and I don't like that as much. I like them to look more like a person made them rather than it was just slapped on. I don't know, it feels a little lazy to me. Anyway, enjoy watching me paint a dragon for most of the rest of this video. I will come back in when we start painting scales, as there are a couple of things I want to mention. And just in case you're not aware, I am doing this in grayscale, and I have a color layer sitting above it, which I do occasionally turn on and off just to make sure it's still looking the way it should look. But yeah, I'll let you listen to some music and watch some drawing for a little bit. So about halfway through I decided to take a break from drawing the dragon and do the background fully. So I'm just returning to my draft sketches and just refining them. So I started with making the sky a bit better because it's kind of crummy. And then I do a little bit of detail on the tiny weeny bit of land you can see in between the clouds. So that's why most of the land is just like nothing because you can't see it. And then I return to my clouds, and I'm using a custom cloud brush that I made and basically just building out some forms of it, and then using the smudge tool also with the cloud setting, the custom cloud brush setting, to blur things in a little bit. I've learned a little bit about clouds. I've learned that they don't make sense half the time, that sometimes they have dark crevices that make their form, and sometimes they have light ones. So I just kind of did a mix of both. I did have a few reference pictures to look at, but this doesn't really look like any of them. I just used them to get an idea of how clouds work, and then I use that knowledge in trying to make my clouds look like clouds, and I'm quite happy with how they came out. I think they look like clouds, and I especially like the big front cloud. Has like different shapes, and some of them are quite like fluffy and I want to sleep in them, and some of them are sort of like drifting off into the distance. So I was very happy with how my clouds came out, which is good because I was excited to do them and it didn't cause me stress or anything. It was just kind of fun to do and enjoyable, and I loved mixing in all the different colors. And Zemper had decided to have their character chasing the sun, which meant that I got to have this really bright yellow coming in from one side, but then the clouds are still being shadowed by the dragon itself. So I got to have these cool mix of like pale yellow, pastel yellows, and orangey, not orange. Fun fact about me, I get orange and green mixed up a lot, so sometimes I say orange instead of green. It's just something my brain learned and is never unlearned. So I meant greenish clouds and grey all mixed in together. And just doing these lovely sort of wispy bits across the dragon, and then I add on the bright highlight coming in from the side, which would be from the sun that's out of frame. Then once I'm happy with the level of light I've added to the unfinished dragon, I finally decided to go back to actually detailing the dragon itself and doing the scales. I did have a couple of reference pictures here. I had some crocodile, alligator references, as I forgot why I was even looking this up. I was looking up alligators for some reason, and I saw this alligator foot, and I was just like, oh, those scales are really cool. Like, I like how those scales look, and I thought it would be a good idea to use them as reference. I don't stick to them incredibly tightly. I just want an idea of how scales sort of change their form as they move through the body. And this alligator sort of showed me that, you know, I have to stop thinking of scales as solid and immovable things. They do bend with skin and crease with skin, especially on like aquatic creatures like alligators and crocodiles. So I just had these reference pictures around the drawing just to remind me of that fact, and it was helpful because I did find myself sometimes making them very rigid and then going, no, I can do creases, it's okay, you can make, they don't have to all be exactly the same shape and size. Scales actually change throughout the body of the creature, so it was helpful. Now I did originally have this grid, as you can see on the whole dragon, and I was drawing the scales on the grid as I went, but then I'd find I'd have to like erase in between the scales because I had lines there, so I ended up separating the two layers. But my tablet still has an issue where if my files become too big, if I start making new layers, which I did to separate the scale layer from the grid layer, it just stops working properly. Half the screen just stops working properly. So I had to become very economical with my drawing. Quite often when I'm drawing, if I get tired of one piece, I'll like stop and like create a new layer and do other parts, but I couldn't really do that. So doing these scales was a bit of a slog for me. I had to just like have the minimum amount of layers open and not create any more layers, despite my burning desire to create a multiply layer that darken the shadows. I knew if I did that, my tablet would just be like, nah, I'm just not going to work now. So I had to try and be a bit more economical with my layer use, at least until I'd finish every single scale and I could combine the layers. So I do end up getting rid of that grid quite like about halfway through doing the scales, and then just trying to remember where the grid was and have it a little bit more organic or random where the scales are placed. But it did help drawing that grid in the first place, so I guess there was a point to that. Anyway, I'll let you watch like another 7 minutes of scales. Enjoy! And finally, with some finishing focus blur, it is done. Here's the finished picture for Zemper. And thank you very much, Zemper, for commissioning me. As always, it's super appreciated, and I really enjoyed this one, and I look forward to doing more for you in the future. Well, thanks everybody for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I also have a Patreon if you'd like to support me. Thanks again, I'll see you all next time. Bye!